Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank you all for joining us for tonight's event with Gregg Turner in conversation with Richard Meltzer and Dave DiMartino discussing Hallucinations from Hell, Confessions of an Angry Samoan. Tonight's event will end with a Q&A, and to submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. If you see a question on the list that you'd like for our speakers to answer, you can click the like button and it'll bump it up in the queue, and we will try to answer as many questions as time will allow. And please also feel free to continue engaging with each other in the chat area. Since we can't see you, it's nice to know you're all present. So I love to see how active you already are before we even began. So we'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, and you can learn more about them on our website by signing up for our email newsletter. You can follow us on social media at Book Soup, and you can also follow our Crowdcast page right here to get direct notifications. And past events are also available on our YouTube channel. Please support Book Soup and our authors tonight by purchasing a copy of tonight's featured book. You can do that by clicking the green button right below the viewer screen. It'll redirect you to our website where you can complete the checkout process, and it will not interrupt viewing, so you can do that at any time tonight. And we're also open for in-store browsing. So if you're local to Los Angeles, please come say hi from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. daily. And we would love to see you. And don't let that stop you from supporting independent bookstores, even if you don't live near them, because we are available online 24/7. So with that said, let me introduce our guests for this evening. Gregg Turner first emerged from the rock crit Heart of Darkness in the mid-'70s as a contributing writer to Backdoor Man magazine, an LA-oriented hard rock and roll fanzine. Turner posted a relatively long tenure at Creem Magazine from 76 to 88 and first cut musical teeth in the 1976 proto-punk band called Vom from LA, which lasted 2 years and ultimately morphed into the Angry Samoans. Dr. Turner received his PhD in mathematics from Claremont Graduate University in 1991 and moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico in 93, where he has two now teenage daughters. He was a tenured mathematics professor at New Mexico Highlands University until recently retiring. And Turner currently persists with solo recording Misadventures, and a third LP is expected by January 2022. Richard Meltzer is the author of over a dozen books, including A Whore Just Like the Rest, winner of the ASCAP Deems Taylor Award, and innumerable articles. And he lives in Portland, Oregon. And last but not least, Dave DiMartino is the former executive editor of Yahoo Music in Los Angeles. He is a former editor of Creem, where he worked from 1979 to 1986. His writing has appeared in the Mojo Collection, The Ultimate Music Companion, The Pop Rock and Soul Reader, and in other anthologies and in numerous publications, including Rolling Stone, Mojo, Musician, Spin, and The Village Voice. Thank you all so much for joining us at Book Soup tonight. It's an honor to have all three of you. And everyone, thank you for joining at home. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation.
Yeah.
Good Lord. Oh, my God.
Sit back.
Yeah. So, I don't know how this is going to work exactly, but Gregg, since your book is so fab, you want to maybe answer a question like you've probably already been asked, like what were you trying to do with it?
That's a good question. I try to figure that out myself when I wake up each day. It would, the idea was we've been telling all this shit to people, bothering students and bothering friends with all these sort of stories. And I just thought after doing this for 20 or 30 years, write it up and see what it's like. But the narrative voice of writing this stuff is so much more difficult to make it readable than just talking and saying it to people. So that was the struggle. And I showed some of the stories to friends and said, "Is this shit?" And they said, "No, keep going." And it really helped to have, for those out watching this, Dave DiMartino was the editor for the book, and paid the price of hell of reading through everything. And, that was very encouraging. And then you take positive feedback where you can get it, and that was great. And then Richard read a few of the stories and really liked one of them, which was great. I was encouraged.
See, I even like the parts that you might say occasionally the parts read like shit, but you have established a line of the metaphysics of shit, so that when you cross it, there's a landscape of that in everybody's writing.
Yeah.
Moby Dick is plenty of shit, and so to be able to set it up that you can write the shit and that which appears not to be shit side by side.
So you like the juxtaposition?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, again, not to sound so kiss-assy, but Richard, I've grown up reading your stuff, and I don't think this book would have happened without experiencing and trudging through reading all of what you've put out. It was that sort of irreverence and attitude that made this exciting to try.
I thank you.
Yeah.
Irreverence is the only form of reverence that is viable.
Yeah. Well, you took a lot of chances in reviews that you wrote. And it was. I always look forward to seeing what the next thing you would be, writing when it would come out. And I thought when I started writing this stuff up, I thought, which direction would I want to lean towards? And you were the first vision that came up.
Well, hats off to me.
Question for you both, since you're both here, and I've never encountered you both at the same time. The first before I saw the Angry Samoans, the videos that we saw long ago, I knew that you guys, the two of you, were in VOM, and obviously you became friends and you knew each other. How did that happen, and how did that relationship kind of grow?
We were also vocalists.
Yeah.
VOM.
Go for it. So how did you guys happen to meet in terms of, and how did you end up doing that?
There was this little group of people who, let's say, we hung around. Was a group of people that hung around with somebody who seemed very cool then, and I don't like to think about much anymore. Gene Scolati. But once upon a time, he kind of, what's the word? Enabled a bunch of young louts to hang out loudishly, right? And in many ways, it had a good intensity until his wife, Marmar, kind of discouraged him from encouraging anybody's loudishness. Do you remember this or no, Greg? Huh?
Yeah, no, I mean, my memory, and I wrote this as a little story in the last chapter of the book of how it came together and what we did a little bit, was that you and I were at the Variety Art Center watching the Weirdos play, and everyone was pogoing.
Well, that was that was like the beginning of seeing, LA bands writ large.
Yeah.
And it was nice to see that something else was happening other than Talent Night at the Palomino or whatever was supposed to be happening in LA. Bands that essentially that Kim Fowley couldn't control.
Right.
And it was nice, really very nice to see that. But I think loudishness is LOUT. That we were uncouth louts. And it's kind of I don't think I'm an uncouth loud anymore, but it's nice to have been, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was fun. We sucked, but it was fun. I mean,
Well, we didn't suck as much as it was simply that I think the thing that you need to do you take a given song, a concept, sonic and words and all that, and you practice it until you can take it live.
Right.
And then by playing it live a few times, you maybe get good at it, or maybe you get sick of it. But the thing to me was that I didn't have the stamina to do like a permanent band of vomish things, because for those two reasons. One, you conquer a song the minute that you know how to play it, so why play it again? Or it's something that needs constant attention to get good, and who's got a lifetime to do that.
I mean, for me, it was just full tweaking a lot of ideas and lyrics. But when I heard "Electrocute Your Cock" that you wrote, that first verse, electrocute your cock, electrocute your cock, looking for a hand job, stick it in the clock. I mean, that won me over.
I'm still pleased with it.
How often have you heard that?
I still think that's kind of like, that's my, it's as good as anything Milton wrote, or at least as good as Short Things wrote.
Yeah.
Yeah. But mainly my feeling was that, I mean, it was one that we never really played all that much. I Live with the Roaches. We never recorded it.
Right.
But I found I saved tapes from some of that. And not recently, 5 years ago, I played some practice tapes of that. It wasn't a bad song. I Live with the Roaches.
And we got the Crickets too. I mean,
right. That's right.
Yeah.
I Live with the Roaches, but I'm no bug.
Right. For those that haven't read the last chapter where I went through some of these details, Richard and I went down to a place called Rainbow Mealworm and Bait Company to look for assorted viscera and critters, where we'd launch our attack at the audience. And they wouldn't sell roaches because they were considered disease-carrying organisms. So we had to settle for, several boxes of crickets, which, was okay.
I remember when we threw them into the crowd, they all backed up, like just a really quick backup.
Yeah. Well, there was that first club in Redondo Beach called Kahuna's Bearded Clam. That was the and we threw the only thing with all the eyeballs and the sheep eyeballs and all of that we tossed out. The owner was only pissed off about the crickets because they wouldn't stop chirping.
Well, yeah.
So
I have, in the course of my life, the current house I live in now, there was one summer 10 years ago, just once, where a cricket outside my bedroom window just made the noise every night, all night.
Yeah.
And no other cricket has disturbed my sleep like that one. But
it's kind of underrated in that way, don't you think?
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
But again, let me say this on the air, because we saying that Vom, you gotta update your little what's the word, lexicon. Vom, why it's a proper noun, starting with a capital V, but the O and the M are not capital. Right. Too many people over the years have. I mean, it's a short. You want to have a short word that doesn't really, make too big a thing about being.
No, I'm with you. I'm guilty of that mistake in the book.
But I mean, yeah. But then again, you wouldn't use a lowercase v.
No.
So,
No, that's the right way to
I mean, the funny thing about language is it can often be much too pretentious.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
Just ask the dog.
Yes, dogs are still.
Just saw a teenage person or something open the door in the back.
Yes,
me. Yeah, that's my son Michael. He's just turned 30. He's a computer engineer. He was here in COVID times.
Right.
Yeah, my 18-year-old Nico just walked in.
I've never had any offspring, and I'm happy with that. But the point is to even think that, like, how old they would be now, like.
Oh yeah.
They'd just be really taking up a lot of space and breathing too much air.
I do have friends who are my age who had kids really late in their lives, right? And like, including a doctor who's close to retirement. He's got 3 kids in college right now, and he'd kind of like to retire. But then there's that financial aspect of life too, right? So maybe it's best to do that early on and move, right?
Or you do it when you have the energy to do it.
Yeah, exactly right. It does take energy. So what else? Greg, one of the things when I was going through your book, the pages in the manuscript, I should say, was that I hadn't been out in LA until the 80s. So you guys have a whole history, of course, that I didn't. I came from Detroit to LA. So a lot of the experience that I was reading in your book about driving in the valley, doing this, going to that interesting restaurant, et cetera, well, I kind of was seeing through the eyes of somebody living, in the valley in the 80s or what have you, or in the 70s, et cetera. So that's what is it for you now? If I'm not mistaken, I think your mom kind of lives close by, relatively speaking. So do you come down here to LA much? I mean, it's an LA book.
I try to make it down as much as I can. She's like 93 years old now. Doing
Wow.
relatively okay for that age. But I live in Santa Fe, and it's a little more effort to go back and forth these days. But when the Angry Samoans started, we were a valley band with angry middle class kids, and we weren't part of the Hollywood scene with the Mask and all of that, and X and that kind of thing. So we had our own set of like internal self-loathing from being neglected and thrown away. So that's sort of what our brand of being in LA was.
Well, LA was like, it's like I moved to LA from New York, and in New York it was like, what is culture? You have from top to bottom, you have museums and all this business, and you can see 20 Jackson Pollocks on a given day and things like that. But it also for a while had viable wrestling, and then little by little, just as I was leaving there in the 70s, Vince McMahon was turning into the devil's partner and destroying mainline wrestling as we have known it. And so moving to LA and seeing the really good scuzzy wrestling at the Olympic Auditorium, like just, like where they'd have a loser. This match was a loser leaves town versus hair match, where it's like one of the guys had to leave town if he lost. If he won, the other guy would have to get a haircut, and it was Roddy Piper, was and Chavo Guerrero, and whatever it was, Chavo was supposed to get his haircut, and the fans so opposed it, they're ripping out chairs, that they actually reversed it, and inflicted it on Roddy. And I just thought, that's so cheesy. That's as cheesy as anything Vince McMahon would do. And so it wasn't long before I found myself that to me, culture in LA began as wrestling and tattoo parlors and nonsense like that. And little by little, I realized because it was a place I came to loathe so much. All I did was stay home and read books. So it's the town where I learned William Faulkner and Melville and all of that stuff, which I wouldn't have done if I'd lived in New York. And so, but wrestling was to me the core culture, core indigenous LA culture.
Roddy Piper was really good in that movie They Live too.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
And he ended up
sunglasses.
Came back to Portland to die. He became a local promoter here, and he did a decent enough, like cheesy production for like a weekly live show, where it was slowly working to the point where they have little vignettes where it seemed like Roddy was planning to some form of insurrection where he was going to undermine the careers of a whole bunch of his name wrestlers.
Right.
And I thought, that's good. And he died before it came to be.
How old was he?
60s, late 50s, maybe.
Huh.
Right.
Well,
he got his start in Portland.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's Canadian. He was from Saskatchewan or one of those places. As was Stan the Man Stasiak. And so a lot of Canadians drift through this town who, give the Canadian corpuscle, some import.
Yeah.
I never would have thought that. I mean, to me, Canada is like the blandest place on earth unless you like hockey. and I got tired of hockey when they started wearing helmets. But the idea that there are decent enough Canadians who could wrestle, I think it's good for the world to know.
I want to.
Gilla Kowalski was Canadian born,
Right.
Ontario.
Yeah. Well, Tolos was too, right?
That's
Hamilton.
absolutely
Yeah.
Ontario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I want to answer your question, Dave, about LA and the stories. 90%, I'd say 86 to 92% of the stories are for real. I mean, maybe 10 of them are literally transcripted from things I saw around me. A lot of it is the germ of that I sort of drew out a little bit. So, I've been accused of major hyperbole or exaggeration, and some of that's true, but I want people to know if they read through the stories that you're getting what I saw around me a lot.
But I think real is real and real enough.
Yeah.
That if anything is real enough, it's real enough.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, what's real do you need?
I was going to say I was mostly impressed unexpectedly by things like your academic stories, that interesting presentation where there was like douchebags sitting in there and like watching people give lectures, the inner politics of that kind of a life. It must have been fascinating for you to be part of that.
I couldn't write that story until he died because I was a groupie. When I first went to graduate school, all the math faculty were nuts. I mean, they were so disassociated. It was like punk rock math. Like I hadn't taken that big a step away from what I was doing. He was one that, would stand up to the board and lecture, and someone would ask him a question. He'd whirl around and answer the question as he was using his hand in the air, sort of emphatically. And then after 5 or 6 questions, he forgot to go back to the blackboard and continue lecturing in the air. And I just thought, this is just wonderful. I mean, and then there was a guy that wrote with both hands at once. The one did the equations and one did the graphs. And, that was pretty out there. But then the left hand, which did the graphs, got 2 sections of material in the text ahead of the hand that wrote the equations. And so it just became like I was having more fun being a part of this than I ever expected. And,
Right.
And so that story where, he fell asleep in the audience when that guy comes to lecture from the East Coast. And that was really true. I mean, he would, at 10 seconds into these colloquium lectures, when we had guest speakers, his eyes would nod and he'd go, but then he'd sort of stop. It was like sort of afternoon sleep apnea. And he would come up and then he would start with these sort of satanic sputterings. God damn it. And the thing is every lecture that he sat through, he was a really well-known name all over the world and in conferences and socially. So everyone knew him that was a guest lecturer, but they didn't screw around, except this one guy, this old man was a professor emeritus, came to this presentation, and it was a whole auditorium. It was full because he had done a result that was remarkable. And, and they were all concerned about what to do about Spencer, which is the name in the story I used. And, so the best they could come up with is having a woman colleague of his sit next to him and stomp on his foot if he started bellowing or making noises. And that didn't really work well. And like 3 seconds into the lecture, he fell asleep. I mean, he just had sugar issues. And then 10
Well,
minutes.
don't you think also math like writing, they're labor intensive things. You're going to get tired.
Well, yeah. I mean, for me, I was very ADHD growing up. When I read all the images visually that I would connect with the text would eventually or quickly morph into things that didn't have anything to do with the text. But that was, I read very slowly. But with math, I could just wade through it really quick because I was controlling my own pace in terms of how I was processing things. So it was convenient.
Speaking of math, I just saw in the news some academic team came up with pi to 6.4 trillion places.
Wow.
And And they said it took only 108 days to do this.
Well, they do this because it's not per se an incredible accomplishment, but they do it to test the computers.
I guess.
If they have a new computer that's hot shit fast, that's what they usually wind up testing. How many digits, how quickly can it produce?
But how do you generate pi? From the ether.
Well, that's,
I mean,
yeah.
It's not like you're dividing. You take a circle and divide it by the diameter. Whatever the fact of its essence is as a constant.
Yeah.
Is generatable.
It comes out in a whole bunch of unlikely formulas in terms of what are called factorial sums and a whole bunch of crazy shit that you wouldn't imagine, expressions. But some of them, if you take the first 2 or 3 terms of the series that leads to the sum and gets to pi, they add up really quickly. So sometimes you only need to take 20 or 30 terms to get 100 decimal places. Sometimes you need to go maybe 100 terms and get 1,000 or 10,000. So they keep trying to make expressions or formulas that the first few terms can get it real quickly, get it very accurate.
And like, why is E that other constant?
Yeah.
It seems like it's less popular. I mean, it's less public imagination.
E's a big deal. I mean, and there's I, which is the square root of -1.
Well, I remember this. I took a class in high school called college math.
Yeah.
And the last day of the class, we learned that E to the pi I power plus 1 equals 0.
Right.
All the constants in one little.
Yeah. No, that's one of the most heralded formulas, little equations in all of mathematics.
Yes.
One of the stories in the book also, I was teaching a class, was sort of a liberal arts beginning math class, but it was just topics to keep them interested. And one of the class was called Counting to Infinity. So it was all these ideas of what is infinite, like blah, blah, blah. And this one girl kept asking questions that made no sense. And finally, she came into my office because she was failing the course and wanted to know what she could do to pass the final. And she kept asking me these questions about infinity. And she goes, how large is it really? I said, it's pretty large. And she goes, no, come on, man. She goes, we're just here in the office alone. Tell me how large it really is. I mean, is it as big as everyone says? And,
well, they could do a computer thing on counting to infinity. One digit at a time. Forget about pi. Just what is the 1 billionth and plus, etc. Just to have it on paper so that just to check.
Right. She lost her head of steam about infinity questions, and she shut the door. This is in the same story, and she put her hand on my knee. And you'd like this, Richard. She said, look, I've got to get an A on the final. What can I do? And I said, look, I can't go there if you're into me. And she says, I just want to offer you one thing. And I said, what's that? She says, you give me an A on the final, and I'll give you a snow cone. And I said, what? Have you ever heard of a snow cone?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. East
what
Coast.
Is it?
It's like shaved ice with syrup.
Oh.
In a what do you call it? One of those paper cups shaped like a, what do you call it? Cone.
A cone.
Cone.
Well, I know that, but what's a
No, it was like you get it in like Italian bakeries and places like that in New York.
Right. Okay.
I don't think we knew the other meaning of snow cone, at least until I read it in your book.
I'd never heard of it. And so I said, she goes, I wouldn't offer this to many people. She goes, I'm willing to give you a snow cone for an A.
Okay.
Good album title.
It was. So,
right.
Yeah.
I once got when I was a sophomore, I got an ABCTF of royal flush and grades.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it happens all the time, but I'm the only one I know who got that. And that's when I majored in math as a freshman.
Really?
And the D and the F of my sophomore year were both math. So that's when I had to become a philosophy major.
You went pretty far with that, didn't you?
My big philosophy is still my bag,
Yeah,
still my game.
yeah. Yeah, so I mean, anyway, a lot of these stories I couldn't write until about 3, 4, 5 years ago. I couldn't put them out because, the people they were about, like that professor that snored in the auditorium and then got called out on it, and then his eyes opened all of a sudden after he'd been sleeping for 40 minutes, and this 81-year-old little mathematician with a bow tie and a tweed coat didn't know who he was. It was the only faculty he had never met, and he points to this, my professor, and who was a big guy, and he goes, "I didn't know they let the custodial staff into these lectures." And the only thing bigger than his girth was his ego. He goes, "Your proof's all fucked up, man." He goes, and all of a sudden, out of the clear blue, he picks third line on the first board and ninth line on the fifth board. And he says they're incongruous. It's wrong. And everybody's telling him to shut up. This isn't even his specialty. So and he keeps insisting, and then someone says, "No, you're right." And so this old man corrects it. He goes, "Well, now it's okay." And someone says, "No, now the 11th line on the 7th board contradicts that change." And this went on for about 10 minutes. And finally, one person says, "No, the whole thing's screwed up." And the guy goes out into the hall to think about it for a while. And then there's silence for like 10 minutes because there was all this press there. It was considered a major unsolved problem for 200 years. And the next thing you hear is,
Right.
yeah, and that was it. I mean, but he died, so I just finally said, okay, now I can write it.
See, one of the things I wonder is, like, I read things like how the Big Bang Theory, or whole big pieces of Einstein, or what's his name, Feynman, who went to my high school, Far Rockaway. That a lot of what they did was simply the radical application of math to physics that was already laid out. That Big Bang is the result of applying the math to possibilities. Oh, look what we get from that. Yeah. Is this so? That math is the language of the full evocation of everything is. Well, it's physical everything is math.
It's a gateway drug.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, right. And then there's a bunch of specialties in math of just pure abstraction, which have absolutely nothing to do with anything until maybe 20,000 years from now that someone figures out they do apply.
Well, abstraction and the like. I mean, my favorite painters are Jackson Pollock and de Kooning and etc. And Rothko, who was from Portland. But anyway, that, because to me, like, anybody can paint still life.
Right. Well, I should give a shout out also, speaking of painting, to the dude who did the cover of the book, David Lebo. Yeah. And he's massively talented. He's so good.
But is this space, did you have to pose for that, or was it from a photo?
Yeah, no, he does models. I posed for him, and he had some woman pose for him. And then he sketches it from there. And
the stuff that's in the bottle, is that
that was created. Yeah, that wasn't a real
right.
But so I got to say, my son that walked by before, when he saw this book in the house the other day, he looked at it and said, "Holy crap, that's like the coolest cover I've seen in a long time on a book." So congrats on that level too, and congrats to the artist. It's a wonderful cover.
A big part of it is you got this really nice green sport coat. You don't see a lot of. It's like the kind of maybe at a golf broadcast.
He's really good. He's I think he's probably watching this, so I hope I'm not wrong when I say this, but I think there were a couple Netflix specials where his paintings were featured or in the background or something, and then he got hugely popular. And most of his stuff is pretty expensive now, but he does all these crazy drawings and concepts for paintings. There was one when he lived in Santa Fe until about 20 years ago, called The Judgment, where they had this guy with a hood over his head and on his knees with his hands tied behind his back in front of a jury docket, and everybody was pointing at him. And this is the kind of stuff he's been doing. Really good.
But like The Judgment, there's a whole tradition of like Russian icons of the Last Judgment. That's the bad one. And this movie Tarkovsky, who did 7 or 8 films, all of them, perfect by designation. Like he'd get Soviet Russia still existed, and they'd give him a budget, and it would be by how many feet of film they let him have for a film.
Really?
He'd do a treatment. Okay, we'll give you 11,000 feet. Right. And so whatever it was, he did. Finally, he had to do one with Russian historical ones. So we found this guy whose whole life was painting, 14th century something, painting Last Judgment paintings. That's what he did.
That's good.
Called Ivan Rublev, and it's like Kurosawa meets Laurel and Hardy. It's a long movie that's generally hilarious, and has pictures of grief. It's what his God's going to do to you because you once took his worship day in vain or something. And
I also want to give a shout out to Gary Panter, who did half of the illustrations that turned out really good. He was very generous in supplying those. And
they're great.
Yeah, and then the other illustrations by hand, less Panterish, were by my ex, Mindy Turner, who is very talented, and she came through because we were panicking that we didn't have 10 more from Gary.
Hey, Greg, let me ask you a question about that. Okay, I guess from your ex. One of maybe it's not related to her, but I was very grateful you gave me like an old Samoan shirt with the logo with the axe through the head, and you said kind of wisely, be careful where you wear that now. Speaking about political terms, but you said I think that your ex designed it. Was that the same person or someone else?
No. This is a first ex that lasted about 4 months. The first ex, we got married because her dad was dying, and I was a young kid, and he said, before I die, I want you to get married. And then when we got married, like a month later, he did die, and she had a nervous breakdown. But before we got married,
you've had two or three wives. You
two,
only two. Why do I think 3?
No, two is enough.
Albert Bouchard of the Ballister Cult, he's had 3, and now a replay of the second one back again. So he's had essentially 3.5.
Well, those guys were always pretty persistent in whatever they did.
Yeah.
Do you keep in touch with Donald or Albert at all?
Albert to a small extent, but Donald I pissed off because I wrote something when the first year that I lived here, his band BOC came to did a record store event. I don't even know if they did if they played a club or whatever it was, but they appeared at Music Millennium, and I'm talking to each of them, and Alan wasn't there. Alan was always the one I was closest to, until we sort of had a falling out because something I wrote in the 80s or whatever it was. I was hoping that he'd like it, and he wrote me, this is all well and good, but it isn't informed by the miracle of heroin addiction, like the work
wasn't that your piece about Patty?
No, she wasn't. Well, maybe I put it in there because Alan and Patty, but in any case, really, we didn't speak after that, and I felt bad. He died of COPD, which is supposed to be the worst of all these mainstream lung things, but anyway, after he was the only guy in the band who read a book, and But anyway, after him, I spoke, to Albert, and then Albert was thrown out. And so Donald, when they came to Portland, he was telling me that he actually said that he was going to jettison his wife. So I've had enough of being married to her.
Yeah.
And so I actually wrote a piece for the Rocket, which was Seattle's rock sheet, and I put that in there. Way to go, Don. His wife's name was Sandy Nazi. That was, spelled something like that, and I behaved very terribly at their wedding, very, very terribly, and I was more of an uncouth flout that day than any other day. And so they kept me off the only album they ever had that sold, Agents of Fortune. I was on every other one of their stupid albums.
Did you make money from Burning for You or Death Valley Nights?
I make some money. 20,000 of it was stolen by Sandy Pearlman. I learned from Albert, because Albert he'd share me the printout of his royalty statements. Yeah. And we were on the same albums together, and we should have received exact same amounts. Mm. And so anyway, that told me that Sandy was burning me, and I never spoke to him again. I have grudges, I guess. But anyway, I didn't want to hurt Donald's feelings, but he didn't even tell me. He told somebody to tell me his marriage with Sandy Nazi is fine.
Yeah.
How dare I write that? And so I guess I'll never speak to him again. I mean, he was somebody he was the quietest person in the band when I lived with them. He was the shortest and the quietest. So in many ways, he could walk in her room and not appear. but he was a great guitarist.
Yeah, I saw them recently, and I fell asleep halfway through the set, but he still could play.
I remember thinking that, like, in retrospect, after all these years, who are the guitarists of his era that he most sounded like? Jerry Garcia. That he actually played the second Dead album, whatever that was called.
Anthem of the Sun.
Yeah, a lot of his playing sounded very much like Jerry.
Didn't you review a Dead record and call it D for the Dead?
I did a live concert.
Yeah.
I saw them play that summer. They played twice the summer of '70 in New York. And the first show was a thing called Midnight with the Dead at the Fillmore East. And they just played for 7 hours, and they were just terrific. And you leave the room, and the sun is out, and you go home, and wow, that was good. And then 3-4 months later, they played at a Puerto Rican dance hall called Hotel Manhattan, or the Manhattan something or other, and it held 3,000 people, and they sold 4,000 tickets. Not a good idea. And so it was just so crowded you couldn't breathe, and it was so terrible. They knew it was a bad scene. Yeah, it was so terrible that the fans demanded an encore, and they stayed there for an hour demanding the encore and didn't get it. And that was the one. That was defeated there.
Yeah,
they could play. They could play as great as it gets, as great as live music can be, and they just play. They phone it in.
Yeah. Otherwise, if not a D, what would they have gotten?
Well, if it had been C+,
yeah, okay.
I would have been honest about it.
Okay. To answer Dave, one thing about the Samoans T-shirt, the first wife that lasted 3 months, she designed that, and we got into trouble really quick when there was a parade in Hollywood called Women Against Violence, and they had this march down the street where they held up that record, and they showed a picture of it in the paper, and I wrote into a couple places that I didn't design it, she did, woman.
That shirt, you sent me that shirt, and it fit perfectly. I've become a real fatso, and so I had heart surgery like 4 or 5 years ago, and ever since then I've just eaten lots of food, and so I'm as fat as a house, and I put that shirt on and it fit perfectly, and I check, oh, extra large.
Mhm.
That's my size. Now I know.
I wear the same size.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm glad you sent me an extra large.
Well, good. There's a double XL.
I guess it was that. So I'm
Yeah.
really, yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, now we're getting deeply intimate here. Hey, there's like 5 questions or so that perhaps can be. Oh, do you want to? How are we going to do that? Is Alex or someone coming back, or should we just do that?
Let's try one before we do two.
Yeah.
Dave, I can ask, or you can ask, however you want to do it.
You go ahead and ask. Okay, it'd be best.
Okay.
Okay.
So here's one from Dean. 2 questions. What are the panelists reading lately? And are you still writing poetry? I think that poetry one might be for Richard.
Yeah. Well,
Am I still writing poetry? Poetry is all I write, and which is to say, I am, my calling card is philosopher, and so, what is philosophy? What was it? At the dawn of time, it was a way to write about things that were absolutely so, like by scientific reckoning, combined with at the same time as being absolutely relevant and interesting, which is poetry. And so my take on philosophy is too much of it has been not poetic enough. And so I write poems, on pieces of paper, and they're lying all over the house. And I can't, I don't remember. I look at it, so I wrote that. I don't remember anything very long at all.
And what are the 3 of you reading?
I read 2 books in the last 6 months. Reread my well-worn copy of Culture by Richard, and also Hubert Selby, The Demon, which I liked a lot.
Demon.
Yeah, The Demon. It's a good one.
Very cool. I just reread some stuff that I read in college that I liked by that British author Colin Wilson. They're pretty normal books, not The Outsider, but the Philosopher's Stone and The Mind Parasites. He's kind of got this Lovecraft thing going on, and that stuff. I enjoy reading stuff that I liked a lot when I was in my early 20s. Right now, it's fun to read and wonder why I liked it, why I didn't. But I like that stuff quite a bit. He's good.
Those 2
Colin.
books, the Colin Wilson books, Kordosh turned me on to those.
I turned him onto that.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I get confused Colin Wilson and Edmund Wilson. I think I've read both of them, but I think, but I can't, there are certain things I can't remember, like proper nouns, like Edmund and Colin. And so I don't know which of them. I think they're both decent writers.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting stuff.
Who's the one that he wrote some stuff about communism, a history?
It must have been Edmund. I don't think it was Colin.
It was to the Finland station. That was his title. To the Finland station. Edmund. Okay. And what have I read lately? I've read the original British. A lot of beatnik books actually have their first printings not in the USA, but there were some British companies that were pretty in French. They're really quick to snap it up. So the first printing of William Burroughs, The Last Words of Dutch Schultz, because they're $50, and it actually has like what it was. It's a book of cut-ups where he uses some of like Dutch Schultz was shot and he was delirious. He took 3 days to die, and the New York cops recorded everything he said, like he's going to give away information about the mob, and so he says things like French Canadian bean soup, and so the English edition of this actually ends as a footnote, as an addendum, the entire text of the actual Last Words of Dutch Schultz. Cool. When it was put out by Grove Press, they left it out.
Should we take another question?
Yes. So from Trace, we have, what's your next creative project, Gregg?
The sequel to this book if we sell about 20,000 copies.
See, I had this book. I wrote this book, however many years ago. Well, a horde just like the rest. Okay, it was just a rock anthology. So I thought that if I ever were offered a sequel, it would be called A Horde Just Like Dave Marsh. But it hasn't been offered.
We have another question from Tanya, which is, do you discuss your teaching experiences in the book?
Yeah, there's at least 1, 2, 3, 4 stories that goes into that. The snow cone story was a true story. That came up. And then, there's one in that same class. I tried to explain to them that, the square root of 9 is 3 because 3 squared or 3 times 3 is 9. The square root of 16 is 4. But when you talk about the square root of 2, you can't find it. You can't identify a number that when you multiply it times itself gives you exactly 2. You can have 78,000 digits that gives you close to that when you square it. So in math, we have something called an axiom, the completeness axiom, and that pretty much says it's a leap of faith that there is such a thing, because we don't want there not to be. And so when I was teaching that in the class, they all kept saying, "Are you like an atheist? I mean, are there atheist people in math that don't believe in the square root of 2?" This is usually what I have to deal with.
I just learned something recently about British empiricism.
Yeah.
Like these people like John Locke and all those, fairly boring people. Like atheism was one category of religious breakdown, like a breakdown of belief. The other is actually as late as the 18th century.
Yeah.
They were talking about overenthusiasm for religious.
Really?
Is also a breakdown that they have fairly flat takes on all the Protestant chapters that were happening then. But anybody who took it too far, they just thought that's as bad as atheism.
Right.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I never knew that until I read some piece about David Hume, this piece in Counterpunch, which is one of these leftist online things. They had a piece on David Hume, who I would have to say I don't like. He picked on Immanuel Kant, who couldn't lick Kant's boots, but he apparently is responsible for the popularization in academic talk of the concept of money. Who'd have known? I don't know what money is. I'd have to actually read them to find out.
Also, that question was from a former student, Tanya Jeffrey. So she says hi.
Oh, okay.
So we have a few more. This one's from Marty. He says, do you talk about STP, not LSD, in the book?
No, that was sort of a one-off LP that the Angry Samoans did at the very end that never was as popular as the rest of the records. But we were making our statement that SDP, not LSD.
Allen Ginsberg, who was quite an overenthusiast for a lot, there was one of those Russian poets, Vozhneshensky, one of these like post whatever it is poets. I don't know if he was any good, but he apparently he asked Alan for some acid. Would you give me some of that LSD you talk about all the time? And Alan gave him STP instead. And he went psycho for like 3 days. He was staying at the Chelsea on STP for at least 3 days without knowing what is this.
Well, I got to tell you one last story. Maybe this is a good way to close it out, of a story that didn't make it in the book, but this is a true story. Speaking of LSD, the one trip I think I took was at a friend's apartments, his mom's apartment, and nothing happened for the first hour. I mean, just trails and ghosts and things like that. So we walked a few blocks down the street to a Burger King and sat down, and he pointed, and things were getting a little more vivid. And I watched where his finger pointed, and it was to the manager, who was like this giant 6'10" or something inch black dude. And he pointed to the guy's butt. And I said, "You mean his butt?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "What?" And I looked at it, and the butt went in. It went concave in instead of convex out. And I said, "You mean his butt just went in?" He goes, "Yeah." And I said, "He doesn't know, does he?" "No, you should tell him." And I walked up to the guy and I said, "Look, my friend and I have been looking at your butt." And he goes, "What?" I said, "No, we've been looking at your butt, and the troubling thing is your butt's going in now." He goes, "What's going in my butt?" And I said, "Nothing. Fortunately, nothing is going in your butt. Your butt itself, you know, if this was a calculus class, I'd tell you that your second derivative is negative in your butt. And, you know, you get out of here. You don't look at my butt. You don't even eat here. You get out of here. My butt's my butt." And so we walked out, and then we heard about 5 squad cars coming after us, or we thought, and walked down back to his mom's apartment. And she gets out of the shower with a robe and a red shower cap. And he points to her and just shrieks and goes, "Medusa!" And he ran down the street, and I just sat there in the couch, and I thought, you know, this is one good time. That's it. And that would have been, you know, another story in the book, but I ran out of time.
See, LSD, the one thing about LSD that just is, you know, it's an essentially American, it is a necessity for anybody who has ever been, what's the word, addicted to American propaganda. It is a drug that no matter what else it generates, it basically cancels your connection to dogma of all sorts. Almost every time you take acid, a dogma or one or more dogmas is just eliminated. You know, and that's, I mean, in terms of American education, obviously everybody has to take. Now they're doing microdoses of LSD for depression and whatever, rather than just, you know, LSD for the same stupid reasons people ever took it. Has some, you know, very positive outcomes.
That was the other story, the Hunter Thompson story in the book, came out of an article I was supposed to write called "The Resurgence of Psychedelics on College Campuses." And so I was going to talk to Owsley, then Kesey, but first was Hunter because he was in town, and no one ever thought of him as sort of a, you know, psychedelic guru, just an orgiastic bum. But you know, so that was my introduction in trying to get a hold of all those people. Didn't work.
The movie, what's the movie? The film version of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
In Las Vegas, yeah, with Johnny Depp.
Totally LSD movie.
Yeah.
Where he sees dinosaurs in the local bar and
right. Yeah.
It's a very, very. It's a good LSD movie.
Yeah. Should we take one more question?
Yeah, let's do one more.
Let's take a boring one.
Let me see. Some of these are, I think, just jokes, but so sorry, everyone. But this is from Teresa. It says, "I'm totally enumerate, but I can play piano. How can I become less enumerate and do math?"
Less enumerate. I don't know.
I guess studying.
Less enumerate and do math. Well, you know, you just start
Well,
counting.
maybe start with E. Like, you know, you
yeah.
Fond of the E chord, you know.
Right.
Little by little, you know, encounter E. It's E per se.
Right. That's a good point. And then, you know, there's no I on the keyboard or in the chromatic scale, but you probably fake it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
after H.
I think we could rapid fire these last 3, maybe.
Okay.
Ron would like to know if you can please explain the windfall profits tax.
Dave, I think that'd be good for you.
No, my mom's calling. That's your story, bud.
What do you think, Richard?
Is this a current? This is topical. This is current news. Windfall profits tax.
I don't know.
I think Greg's sort of afraid to say that he's very up on it because he's done a little research about the expected sales of this upcoming book and what that's going to mean to him and to his budget this year. So but he's a little modest.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is a concern, and I was trying to find an appropriate accountant to worry about these kind of issues.
Because everything in the 50s, almost everything was windfall profit tax. Under Eisenhower, the maximum category for income insurance, not insurance, income tax was 94%.
Yeah.
That was, that's what. Let's go back to that.
No, that's what it took a nosedive under Reagan. That was the beginning and the end.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, we got 2 more. So Mark says, your Vom single ruined my stylus, and will you replace it? I've been waiting for years.
What do you do? Put a quarter on the what's it to? No. You don't know. You're not making. You don't know how to use a stylus properly.
You have extras, Richard? I only have a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just have 2 left.
I haven't changed the stylus in 40 years.
Wow. You must be
haven't got around to it.
All right, and one more from Billy. If Jerry Falwell ever cashed a royalty check for homosexual.
Oh, you see, for those of you that got the original record when we did the song Homosexual, we credited it to Jerry Falwell so as to not be seen too adjacent to bands like Fear that did songs like that for real. But I look back on that, it's sort of, the song is sort of embarrassing. No, we didn't send Jerry any money.
Well, here's a question I got to know the answer to. What has become of Todd Homer?
Todd Homer, from what I understand, lives in the low desert in Southern California. And from, again, what I understand, in last November, October, he was Donald Trump's campaign manager in the little town he lives.
He was once working for Jesse Jackson's campaign.
Yeah. He's very malleable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is he the composer of "They Saved Hitler's Cock"?
I wrote the words, and he and Jeff Dahl wrote the riff.
Damn good song.
I stand by that. The best lyric I ever wrote was, "If Hitler's cock could choose its mate, it would ask for Sharon Tate."
That's right.
I can't do better than that.
Ed Sanders did a Sharon Tate bio a few years ago. That isn't really very good. I was disappointed. Ed Sanders, who may, I hope, end up as the last surviving beatnik. But first, Gary Schneider has to go first.
Well, he was from Portland, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
He was one of 3 Portland beatniks.
I didn't know that.
Philip Whalen and Lou Welch.
Oh, okay.
They all went to Reed.
Wow. Reed used to be famous for the faculty taking trips on the roofs of the buildings there back in the 60s.
Yeah.
So they say.
They've had a few actual heroin overdoses in the last few years.
Really?
And it just troubles them, that's the wrong way to go. They think for reading.
For tuition, it's like $70,000 a year, probably.
Yeah.
So, all right, are we done, or is that?
That's all our questions.
All right. I personally want to thank Dave DiMartino and Richard Meltzer for making this a lot of fun for me.
We thank you.
Yeah.
Likewise, I feel the same way.
Here we are. Now we got 4 faces.
And Sam, thanks to you and Alex also.
Yes, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. This was a great conversation. If anyone can watch the replay, so it is rewatchable. So please share it. And if you didn't get your copy of Hallucinations from Hell, please do that with the green button below. And you can do that anytime. Support independent bookstores, even if it's your local one. And congratulations, Gregg. And here's to a book 2. And thank you.
A book 2 will happen, man, with that LSD butt story in the Burger King if you buy the book.
Right.
Yeah.
All right,
Thank you all.
everyone. Thank you. Have a wonderful night.
All right. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you. Good for your time. Good to see you guys.
Bye.
Yeah.